If I were to make a prediction, I would predict a big bag of money showing up on somebody's back porch behind some bushes for their campaign this year. And I bet that there are council members who would be unaware of that happening. Don't expect that to show up on the campaign finance report either as a public record. And that's the kind of action that lands people in prison.
Is that all, Mr. Lyons?
For now, yes.
Welcome to Truman's Town Hall with your host, Matt Truman.
Hello. This is Matt Truman. Thank you for downloading this episode. Thank you for sharing with a friend. Wow. Huber Heights. Man. I just want to let you guys know that we all should be praying for the city of Huber Heights. These aren't easy times. These are not easy times for that city. It seems like there's something that comes up on that council every few months. It seems like that, doesn't it? And we're going to go through all that today on Truman's Town Hall. I've watched these meetings that have taken place over the past 2 weeks, a week, really. And I'm going to try my best to break it down like we do here on Truman's Town Hall. And I appreciate everyone listening. First, we need to travel back in time. We will. Huey Lewis in the news. We will get back in time. For those of you who have been following Truman's Town Hall, following Huber Heights City Council, you would know that prior to the January 2nd, 2018 meeting, council had changed the rules to allow council members to chair the meeting during Mayor McMaster's term. It was changed back. When Mayor Gore was elected.
Yes, Mr. Campbell.
I would, at this time, move to suspend Article 2, Section J, Presiding Officer of the Rules of Council, and move to designate the mayor as the presiding officer for all council work sessions, regular city council meetings, and special city council meetings through February 28th, 2017. That is in the form of a motion.
Back then, as a resident of Huber Heights and someone who voted for Mayor McMaster's, I was not happy when council changed those rules to allow to basically boot McMaster's out of the work sessions as the chair and allow council members to alternate seats. Because as you know, the mayor directs conversations. And as you also know, the work sessions is where the sausage is made. And during this very same meeting, council was discussing the city manager employment agreement. At the time, Councilwoman Smith was kicked off as the chair. Mayor Gore took the chair and began chairing the meeting. He began with a speech.
I have item 4E, the city manager employment agreement. And if I may, I'd like to begin the actual discussion on this particular agreement. I have some things I've prepared that I'd like to discuss and talk about. So if you will just bear with me while I go through the information, please. So first of all, I'd like everyone to know that I've been listening and watching this contract issue progress over the course of the past year. I've given this much thought since the last council meeting where the contract issue was passed on to the 2018 council. First of all, I want to make it very clear that no one to date has been able to explain to me any reason why Mr. Schomer doesn't deserve to retain his position as the city manager. It is my belief that Mr. Schomer has done a very good job and, more importantly, has been very effective in his role as the city manager. Now, clearly, one of the major issues with the city manager is the residency requirement. And because of that, I think it's important that we look at some history of that residency rule. The residency rule was first deemed unconstitutional in Ohio in 2006. It was then upheld by the Supreme Court of Ohio in a challenge by the city of Cleveland in 2009. So that means twice this rule has been defeated before the hiring of Mr. Schomer. Therefore, I'm not going to place any blame on a previous council for not following the charter in this particular instance, because 2 different times the Ohio Supreme Court said that that rule could not be enforced. I think it's very important to note that. I attended a meeting before the May primary where residents had the opportunity to ask questions about the residency charter amendment, and I think people left more confused than they were before they got there. Different council members at that meeting had different opinions on the residency rule, even though the attorney that the city pays to advise us on such matters had also stated that he believed that rule could not be enforced. I've spoken to several residents over the course of the last 7 months since the voters decided to keep the residency rule in the charter. And based on what I've heard, I'm honestly not quite sure they knew there was a ruling in existence by the Ohio Supreme Court that said residency rules were unconstitutional. I also don't believe it was made very clear that the only reason that this was on the ballot was because the charter can only be changed by a ballot initiative, and the city was trying to make the charter match the most recent known ruling concerning residency. After reviewing the proposed contract and completing my own research, there are 4 elements to the contract that's on the table that's been moved to this reading. I propose to amend, and I believe these changes will satisfy the concerns of the residents, the city council, and the city manager. Number 1, I propose the residency requirement be removed from this contract and allow Mr. Schomer to remain at his current residence. This also eliminates the $24,000 living expense from the contract over the next 24 months. Over the course of the last couple meetings, I've heard residents speak from the podium and members on this council speak to the issue of just reverting back to the old contract, and that contract didn't include residency. So I'm hopeful this is a point we can put to rest and move forward on an agreement. Number 2, I propose that the city manager be allowed to retire and be rehired. By allowing Mr. Schomer to retire and be rehired, the city will stop paying the 19.5% salary contribution into the police and fire pension fund and begin only paying 14% into the PERS system, which will save the city $7,758 annually based on the proposed contract salary and a total of almost $40,000 over the proposed contract term. Number 3, I propose the length of this contract be changed to 5 years. Regardless of who is serving in the position of city manager, it is my belief that the position should not be able to be used as a political game. A 4-year contract as currently proposed places any type of contract renewal or hiring of a new city manager in the middle of an election, which just seems irresponsible and unjust to all parties involved. It's my belief that a 5-year contract places any contract negotiations or hiring of a new city manager in between election cycles. And look, that just makes sense to me, along with adding some much-needed stability in that position and for the staff that the city manager leads. This also adds a specific term to what is currently an indefinite contract. Number 4, I'm also proposing a waiver of liability and settlement of $15,000. I realize this has been a source of contention. However, I believe it's in the overall best interest of the city to agree to the liability waiver and settlement and put this issue to rest once and for all. I believe everyone has expressed an interest in moving forward on these terms. In my opinion, this helps us do just that, move on, so we can begin the real work of moving the city forward in all areas. Thank you.
Okay, keep that speech in your mind. First thing I want to point out is the Supreme Court cases. We debated that on the Charter Review Commission. I was a resident of the city of Heber Heights. I sat on the Charter Review Commission. I brought up term limits to the Charter Review. They didn't want to deal with that, and we'll talk about that a little later. I also was against removing or putting forth to the ballot, removing the residency requirement for the city manager. That's on record. You can review the Charter Review Commission and watch the debate if you want. But secondly, we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this podcast. I think the major question still lies for all the Huber residents. What changed from this speech until what you folks know now? What changed? Because following the January 2nd, 2018 meeting, Councilman Campbell had your former city manager swear him in because he was just reelected. During this employment agreement discussion, the mayor introduced favorable amendments. What changed? So now we go into, we need to break down March 8th, 2021, March 10th, 2021, and March 15th, 2021, and March 16th, 2021. So 4 meetings have happened in the city of Huber Heights, and I hope you guys have watched all of them. Because like I say on this podcast, you can listen to this podcast all you want. You can hear my opinions. You can hear me play their own words, right? That's what we do on here. We play their own words, and I add in some opinion or some discussion, or sometimes we have people come on the podcast and talk about different things. But do your own research. And I want to say, before we get into March 8th, 2021, the citizens of Huber Heights did an amazing job. You're doing an amazing job. You are keeping your council accountable. And especially, I'm going to give a shout out to a Huber Heights City Commission who you can just tell they really care about what's going on in their city. The Culture and Diversity Citizens Action Committee, you guys are rock stars. I saw a couple of you asking questions, and it was awesome. It was awesome to see. It wasn't, when I was watching it, I didn't see you, for the most part, I didn't see anyone look to favor any one council member. They just wanted to know the truth, and they're frustrated too, just like all of you are. Anyway, that was awesome. The citizens having discussion over on Brick City Town Hall, citizens having discussion on other social medias, on their own personal page. You guys are great. I was very happy to see citizens speaking out. And we'll talk about that a little later too. All right, let's get down to it. March 8th, 2021.
Next up is item number 13, executive session. We do have a reason for an executive session this evening. Mr. McDonald, if you could, or do you have that prepared? Yes, Mr. Rogers.
It would be a motion to go into executive session for personnel matters to consider the employment of a public employee.
Is there a motion? Mrs. Baker? Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Byrd seconds. Mr. Rogers?
Mr. Otto? Yes. Mr. Lyons?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Ms. Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mrs. Burge?
Yes.
Okay, motion to move to executive session passes 8-0. Okay, so it is now 7:45, and we have come out of executive session. And based on the discussion, I would entertain a motion to direct the city law director to execute a resignation and consultation agreement of city manager Rob Schomer for a total of $150,000 for that agreement. Is there a motion? Mrs. Baker motions. Is there a second? Mr. Hill?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Rogers?
Mr. Lyons? Mr. Lyons, did you hear me?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Mr. Shaw?
Yes.
Ms. Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Mrs. Burge?
Yes.
Mr. Otto? Yes.
And the motion carries 8-0. I'd ask Mr. McDonald if you would get with Mr. Schomer as quickly as possible to execute those agreements. His resignation is effective upon the execution of that agreement. There will be a special city council meeting called within the next 48 hours, within 24 hours of the execution of that agreement, to name an interim city manager, and we will move forward from there. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening, and we'll see you soon. This meeting at 7:48 is adjourned.
All right. At this point, the public, we only know that the mayor just did everything perfectly. He went into executive session, right? They were talking about a personnel matter. And then when they came out, they talked about the resignation. And who was it that made the motion for all this? Miss Baker made the motion, right? And Mr. Hill seconded it. And was there any discussion?
Can't say one word. Even a guy who can't think says something. You guys just stand there? Come on!
That was a mistake, wasn't it? No discussion at that point? Not making sure that the contract is in front of you? Big mistake. Then we moved on to March 10th, 2021.
Next up is item number 3, which is our only item on the agenda this evening for this special meeting, which is item 3A. Mr. Rogers, if you'd read, please.
Item 3A, an ordinance appointing Scott Falkowski to the position of interim city manager of the city of Huber Heights and declaring an emergency at the first reading.
Is there a motion? Ms. Baker, is there a second? Mr. Webb?
Second.
Mr. Hill, second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Mr. Otto?
Yeah, I think before we go through this and make this appointment, I have no qualms with the appointment of our chosen interim city manager, but I think we need to have a public discussion about how we got to this place. I've gotten a lot of feedback and contact from members of our community, residents, and a lot of people are very confused about what's going on. To be quite honest with you, there are members of this council that are a bit confused about what's going on and how we got here. So, again, I'd like to open up a discussion to talk about how we got here. What exactly is the status of Mr. Schomer's release, we'll call it that, and how we ended up after discussions on Monday evening, and what I believed was going to be was instructions to our law director to handle the agreement, write the agreement, negotiate the agreement, and then meet with Mr. Schomer and bring it back to us. And it appears that the agreement's just done. So I just kind of want to know, because I was under a different understanding when we went into this, that we were releasing our city manager, not that he had found better opportunities and was moving on from our city. And if he's found better opportunities and is moving on, then we certainly don't owe him any type of severance, in my opinion.
So I would say I don't believe this is the reason that we're here this evening to discuss this. The item on the agenda is the specific to the appointment of an interim city manager at this point.
That's correct, but this is absolutely germane to this discussion, though. We wouldn't be in this position if not for our past city. We'll just say Rob Schomer's leaving. So, again, I was under an understanding that this was going to be a release that wasn't, we were negotiating a release, but I was completely unaware that there were other opportunities and that he was freely resigning to pursue additional opportunities. If that were the case, I certainly wouldn't have agreed to a severance package of any sort. So I just want to make it clear that I feel like that there was a little bit of a bait and switch going on. I don't appreciate it. I feel kind of run over, and I know a lot of the residents of our community feel the same way. And I'll leave it at that.
Any other discussion? Mr. Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor. My discussion is more of a statement with some questions to kind of catch everything up to speed since we're on the topic. The previous city manager was formally hired back on April 14th of 2014. In the meeting minutes of that meeting, that agreement was passed without unanimous vote. Before my taking office in 2016, I advocated my opinions regarding the employment of the city manager in Huber Heights. In 2018, during the discussion of the retire-rehire agreement, including a payment of $15,000 then, I continued to advocate my position. In meeting minutes of that meeting, that agreement was passed without unanimous vote. That position has remained and up to including March 8th, 2021, when City Council unanimously voted to accept the resignation of Rob Schomer.
Yes, Mr. Webb.
I do apologize. I was not finished with my comments.
There is one purpose for this meeting tonight. Can we please stay on topic?
Who's running this meeting?
I am.
Okay.
So, Mr. Webb, I would agree. And in the rules of council, there are particular types of motions, and item number D is specific to the order of the day on that meeting. And I would agree that this topic is getting off discussion. This was a meeting specific, an emergency meeting to discuss the appointment of the interim city manager. That is the intention of the meeting this evening. And if we want to have discussions regarding how we got here, where we're going, where we've been, your misunderstanding of a vote that you agreed to, we can have that discussion at another time. But this evening, we're here to discuss the interim city manager appointment by Mr. Falkowski.
All right. So, what happened between March 8th and March 10th was the Dayton Daily News had an article. Several council members were quoted in this article of the Dayton Daily News. We talked about that a little bit on the last podcast. Then, finally, Councilman Otto and Councilman Shaw, and then later on Councilman Lyons, began to question the situation at hand, which was promptly shut down by the Ward 2 City Councilman Don Webb, and then ultimately shut down by the chair of the meeting, Mayor Jeff Gore. So then Councilman Ed Lyons, Ward 6, decides to question.
Where are we in the contract process in offering to interim city manager Scott Falkowski?
So he has agreed to be the interim city manager.
Whoa, Mayor, how do I know that? Do I take your word for it?
Well, I guess if we appoint him and then he says no, then that would put us in another position.
No, I don't have any problems with Assistant City Manager Scott Falkowski. I think he's a delightful pick. I've worked with him for 10 years on council. I'm just wondering how far the trust can go when you say something and, whether I believe that anymore or not. And this goes back to the issue at hand. You set the agenda. There's no discussion, and you're shutting down Mr. Shaw with the discussion. And, that is your right. But in my opinion, Jeff, you perpetuated a fraud against the citizens of Huber Heights with this position we're in.
Yeah. This is enough. Yeah.
You are certainly entitled to your opinion. We are here. In fact, the video, if you go back and watch the video, at the end of the last council meeting, it was made very clear to everyone. Mr. Otto, you used the word handle, but I believe the word we gave to the law director was to execute. I believe everyone knows what the term execute means. That means take action.
Well, actually, Mayor, no.
Mr. Lyons, that was what was said. That was what was said at the meeting. The law director was directed to execute. It's on the video. When the video was done, once we were finished, and after that vote was taken, after the executive session, it was made very clear that we would hold a special meeting within 48 hours of that meeting to discuss the appointment of an interim city manager. All that is on video. All that is on record. Mr. Otto, you even leaned over to me and said, "Hey, can we take care of this pretty quick? Because I'm going out of town at the end of Wednesday. So I'd like to make sure that we can kind of wrap this up in about 10, 15 minutes." We had that discussion right here. So for you today to act like you don't know what was going on and what this meeting's about is just completely unnecessary.
That was prior to
There's been a
Mayor,
motion.
please direct your comments.
There has been I am still the presiding officer of this meeting. There has been a motion and a second. And if there is no further discussion regarding
I'm just asking you to direct your comments to me since I was the one that was called on.
All right. So I'm not going to carry on with that. You guys kind of know If you've been paying attention, you know that there was a lot of different back and forth with that. But ultimately, Mayor Gore shut down this discussion. A few things got out there, right? On March 10th. A few things got out there. And one of the good things that came out of all this discussion that was shut down was that Representative of Ward 1, Richard Shaw, asked for a special meeting. He was the first one to do so. Residents of Huber Heights saw this meeting. They then saw it on the news. And yes, it was mentioned during the meeting. I did a podcast with the at-large Representative Glenn Otto and the current candidate for Ward 3, Frank Wiley. You guys heard that on the podcast number 83, I think it was, the Huber situation. So a lot of people picked up this quote-unquote story about the Huber situation. Mayor Jeff Gore posted on his mayor Facebook page. He first announced that on Tuesday, and you guys can go over and look at it. He first announced that on Tuesday at the work session, residents would be able to attend and voice their opinion and concerns. Then, I think it was late Friday, there was a special meeting called for Monday. And then it took a while, but then that was posted over on the mayor's Facebook page for residents to come out and discuss this situation. Because you had 3 council members. Yes, they didn't question during the original vote, and they made mistakes, errors. They should have had the contract in front of them. They should have had that discussion during that meeting. And we'll learn going forward in this podcast that what they have been saying is that no, they feel, and this is what they said, right? And this is what we know as the public, that they feel misled. Some have used other harsher words, but I'm going to just say it like that, misled. So the special meeting came March 15th, 2021.
Item 3A, a resolution accepting the resignation of and ratifying and approving a consulting agreement with Robert Schomer at the first reading.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. What I would like to do now is defer to Mr. McDonald and have Mr. McDonald kind of explain the process and what the kind of the purpose of this particular resolution is.
Here.
Mr. McDonald, if you would.
On March 8th, 2 fundamental provisions were discussed and determined. 1, Rob Schomer would resign. 2, the city would pay $150,000 for a consulting agreement.
All right, I'm just going to say right now, enough of these hybrid meetings. I think a lot of you agree. The council members who sit at home behind their computers and do these city council meetings need to get inside council chambers. If the employees have to be there, the representatives should have to be there as well. That was brought up by somebody else. That was brought up by this podcast on the last podcast. It's silly. Some of the council members have a hard time with technology, apparently. You're doing the people's business. Get there. Okay, that's my opinion. I'm trying to save opinion for the end here. And I'm trying to just go through facts. So I'll shut up. Shut up, Matt. I'm telling myself right now, shut up, Matt, and let the council members speak.
On March 8th, 2 fundamental provisions were discussed and determined. 1, Rob Schomer would resign. And 2, the city would pay $150,000 for a consulting agreement. Council unanimously directed me to get the resignation and execute the agreement. That was done. Mr. Schomer resigned. The agreement was signed. Payment is to be made within 7 days. At the appointment of the interim city managers, questions arose as to the process. The process was not typical, but it was legal, and the agreement is binding. Because of all the attention this process received, the mayor wanted to proceed with litigation. And I cannot stress enough that the existing agreement is a binding obligation of the city. While I'm hopeful that this legislation passes, just for consistency purposes, whether it does or doesn't is irrelevant to the existence of the original legal binding agreement.
All right. So the city attorney went through the position of the city. Then the mayor explained a little bit of what was going to happen and how the meeting was going to be ran. But first, he had another speech.
So with that said, I do have a statement I want to read, and then we'll get into further discussion. So I would like to say that Rob Schomer is my friend. I've built a relationship with Rob over the last 3 years, one based on mutual respect for the jobs that we were required to do. The events that took place last weekend are undoubtedly the most agonizing events I have ever had to manage professionally. Yes, I began the discussion about moving this city in a different direction in regard to the city manager. Now, with that being said, Rob was an employee of this city.
Okay, if you want to listen to another speech of Mayor Gore's, you can definitely go over to www.hhoh.org, scroll down to agendas and minutes, click on that, go over to council meetings, look for the March 15th special meeting, and there you'll find it. You can watch the whole 3+ hour meeting that we're about to review here, and hopefully in a short matter of time. So the mayor made a speech, and I want to make a note. He said something to the effect, I never had any intention of keeping this from the public. Yet, on March 10th, he shut down the discussion. We already went over that on March 8th, nobody had discussion, but on March 10th, they did, and they shut it down. So yes, there was, in my view, the way I saw it, and I think the way you guys saw it, is that he did shut down discussion. So the intention was there, was it not? I don't know. That's a question. So keep that in mind.
I will answer your questions. However, this council has always taken the position that we do not discuss personnel matters publicly. So I won't be discussing any of the details behind the separation of Rob and the city, but I stand behind that decision that was made by this council behind me in an 8-0 vote.
I find this portion of the mayor's statement to be very, very important. First, he says he has no intention of keeping any of this from the public, except why the city manager decided to resign. And we'll learn a little bit more about that as this podcast progresses. Another thing to note is that he said in his prepared statement, one he probably deliberated over, that he stands behind the vote. He stands behind that vote. So when he tries to throw it back to council and say, hey, it's those guys, and we'll talk about that later maybe as well. Hey, it was those guys that voted 8-0. He as well stands behind that vote. So that speech went on. Like I said, you can go watch it. The citizens, you folks, the folks I am so proud of right now, the folks that I'm like, yes, get together. Hold your city council accountable for their actions. Make them work for you. Do it. And you are doing it, which is awesome. A citizen rose to speak, one that's been on Truman's Town Hall. Joseph Hendricks. Man, I'm just going to say one word. Metadata. Anyway, Joseph Hendricks had this to say.
So I have a couple of thoughts on tonight's special meeting session. My first thoughts on this first agenda item, I think it should be split into two resolutions. The agenda item as it stands is a resolution accepting the resignation and ratifying and approving a consulting agreement with Rob Schomer. I think it should be split into two. You should have the first resolution, which should be to accept the resignation of Mr. Schomer. And the second one should be to ratify and approve the consulting agreement. Even the law director just now said those were two fundamental issues. In fact, the city charter says that each resolution and ordinance should be one subject. So you should all vote today just to have those as two separate resolutions. My second thought is on the consultation agreement, which a lot of this may not apply because he said that it was already in writing and it can't be changed. But my thought is that his annual salary for 2020, according to public records, was about $150,000. Annual is a 12-month period. The current consulting agreement says he's going to be paid $150,000, and then he's going to be available for consultation through September 8th, 2021, which is about 6 months from now. That makes it about double his salary now, because $150,000 for 6 months is an annual salary of $300,000. I don't think his consulting payment should be greater than his current salary. So that means he should either be available for an entire year, or the amount should be $75,000 to make it equal. Also, the current consulting agreement says that he's going to receive his payment in a lump sum within 7 days of the agreement. Receiving this money in a lump sum gives him no financial incentive to consult with the city past the date of his lump sum. He might have moral or ethical obligations to continue to consult, but he'll have no financial obligation. So instead, he should have received it in periodic payments through his consultation, and if he should cease consulting, then he should cease being paid. I believe, at least to the first one, council tonight could make these changes, of course, by having a motion to amend the resolution to split it in two. Next, I have just a couple questions. I'm curious, each council member, when did you first become aware of his pending resignation? Everybody could just tell me when you became aware of it.
I'd be happy to say it was on the 9th.
On the 9th?
Correct.
I believe it was last Monday during executive session I learned of this. I think that was the 8th. We had a group discussion in executive session.
I did not see any resignation until the 9th. Last Monday.
Last Monday? And then I believe we have 3 council members on.
I have a question. Are you asking about the resignation letter or his actual resignation?
Just when you learned of his resignation. I mean,
Monday at the meeting, just like the rest of the council. Thank you.
Ed?
That would be Tuesday when I received it by email through our clerk of council, which I believe is a public record.
Okay. And Nancy?
Ladies and gentlemen, Nancy Burge does not answer this question from a resident. She actually exits the meeting. You can watch the video. It happened. Why? When did they find out? When was it? Now, I know they all played political games, right? Oh, well, it was the 9th, it was the 8th, it was this, it was that. It was Monday, it was Tuesday. But we're going to learn further in this podcast that there was actually a backdoor meeting on Saturday. And what discussions happened before then? Who knows? There's still a lot of questions out there, but we're going to try to break it all down.
Nancy Burge is now exiting.
All right, so that happened. Why? Who knows? Was it technical? Was it not technical? Mr. Hendricks, spelled just like Jimmy, went on to question the city attorney, metadata.
Unless Nancy can get back with us, I have for the law director. Did you write the consultation agreement yourself?
Yes, I did.
Did you write it on your own volition, or did somebody instruct you to do it?
That's a good question. Well, no, somebody must have instructed me to do it.
Who instructed you to write it?
Most likely the mayor.
Most likely the mayor. Okay.
No, it was the mayor.
Was the mayor?
No, most likely, yeah.
Okay. When did you write the consultation agreement?
On Monday.
On Monday. Monday was, what was the date of Monday? March 8th, 2021. I did a public records request for the original document that you wrote, not the signed one, not the scanned one. Computer files have something called metadata. So when you take a picture of something, it tells you your geolocation, your location, your lat long. Another thing metadata also tells you is when, say, the picture was taken. The metadata, this is what the metadata said for the document that our law director wrote, says that it was written on February 6th, 2021 at 4:52 a.m.
Wow. I think Mr. Hendricks dropped the mic, flew out the bit. No, I'm just kidding. Wow. Metadata. I know nothing about metadata. On a future podcast, we're going to learn about metadata or talk about metadata because I'm now intrigued. Wow. It's awesome. You learn something new every day. Question. Who's the one?
So I think what I had said in my statement was that I am the one who began the discussion regarding the separation of Mr. Schomer from the city.
Okay. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. There it is. Mayor Gore is the one who initiated all of this. All the council members, except Council Member Burge at large, said when they knew, when they heard about all of this. And we'll learn backroom meetings like have been happening for years and years and years in the Huber Heights City Council. But is it really when they found out? I don't know. It's a question. It's possible you guys will find the answer. Or you'll have to trust what they said. Residents in the city of Huber Heights really brought this subject to light. Great job, residents. You put the pressure on. You force these meetings through discussions on Facebook, with the help of some news stations and other reporting. Truman's Town Hall. And it came to light. And the residents really, really stood out. Here's a piece of that.
Because where I'm getting at is my understanding was that he was allowed to come back in on Tuesday and go up to his old office and take out anything that he wanted that particular time. And I would look at it that, to me, he should have, if that was his last day, was Monday, why was he coming back in? If it's collect things, I can understand that. But why would he not have like an escort or somebody going with him up there to make sure that he is not, and I'm not accusing him of anything, but to say that he's not taking things that actually paperwork or anything else that would actually belong to the city.
Okay, well, that's interesting information because you have information that I don't have.
Is that right?
Mayor, another question that I had that Mr. Thomas, I believe, had brought up, that Monday was supposedly the previous city manager's last day. However, he was here on Tuesday conducting a staff meeting and up in his office until roughly about 2 p.m., maybe a little before that. But you said you wasn't aware of that, right? Nobody had told you of that.
I was not informed that he was that day. I found out later, but I was not informed that day that he was here.
Okay. That's why we do this podcast. It's why we do the podcast, and it's why the residents were questioning. And I believe that's why Mr. Shaw brought that up. Is because, you tell the resident you had no knowledge. Oh, that's interesting. You're saying this, and I have no knowledge of this. Yet, you did have... Well, I didn't know that day, but I learned that... Yes. Okay. Is it clicking with you folks yet? There's a major question that I don't think will fully be answered, but why was the former city manager removed? Why?
Personal records and disciplinary actions and things like that, those are typically all kept private. This council has several times discussed personnel matters. This council has, in the past, always asked to keep matters of personnel private. But I can assure you, if Rob would have committed a crime, committed a felony, or anything like that, not only would you be here, but
news cameras would be lined up here. And this would not just be local Heber Heights Facebook news. This would be probably nationwide news, or certainly at least Miami Valley news as a bigger region.
Yeah, Fox 45 did not pick up this story. Moving on.
So again, there is a non-disparaging clause in the agreement that council agreed to. The last thing I'm going to do is discuss anything negative about Rob Schomer. There were reasons that it was time for us to move in a different direction, but I guess I'm just going to have to ask the residents of the city to please believe me that nothing was done illegal.
Okay, so you guys heard that, right? The last thing he's going to do is discuss it.
As you mentioned, there was an issue regarding the granite discussion at the work session regarding the Veterans Memorial, and that certainly was a piece of frustration that was sticking with me, that I was very frustrated over, and I made that opinion very apparent.
How ironic. For me, that's ironic that the Veterans Memorial is part of all of this. We may talk about that later, but moving on.
I couldn't agree more about the issues in the Dayton Daily News and the Azrati blog posts and the news articles and the 530 News. I couldn't agree more. And I would just like to say that I had no part in that. I was misquoted several times over social media of something that I had said. And I didn't actually speak to anybody from any news agency other than the Dayton Daily News and Channel 2 sent me an email. But I don't have the time during the day. I work during the day to just say, hold on, class, I'm around the hallway and have a conversation in a news interview.
Is that right? You can't pause class and have a conversation. I invited the mayor on Truman's Town Hall. He mentioned Mr. Truman's podcast while I'm thinking about it. If you're going to mention this podcast at a council meeting, please. It's Truman's Town Hall, available on Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts from now on. But I invited the mayor here on Truman's Town Hall to have a discussion. I have yet to hear back. But if you want to talk about pausing classroom time to have conversations, I'm all ears. Okay, trucking along here. There was an email sent to City Council with a question. Essentially, it was, why is a consultant needed for the city? Let's listen to that portion of the meeting.
I don't see a name, but it is an email that says, can you explain what the former city manager would be consulting about that warrants a payment of $150,000? If Mr. Schomer is resigning, I don't understand how this makes sense financially for the city of Heber Heights. I have to be on a strict budget to afford the property tax hike I just received. Seeing this amount of money going out for a consulting fee makes me rethink that this is not the area I should continue living in. So with that comment, I would just say that the $150,000 is actually $109,000 based on the $41,000 of Mr. Schomer's accrued vacation that was entitled to him regardless of how he's separated. So I think this is probably a good time then to talk to Mr. Flakowski about a consulting agreement.
Okay, so then at this time, the current interim city manager is brought in to the discussion and explaining why a consultant is needed. A couple of the ideas that were brought up, or a couple of the examples, was the Rose Music Center. Question this, residents of Heber Heights. The Rose Music Center, how much do you pay for Mimi, the contracting company? How much do you pay them to run the Rose Music Center? Question that. And is there a consultant needed to help run that? Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Well, we just heard that we have a Veterans Commission. Why do you need a consultant to engage with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? Sewer and water and all this stuff was also brought up. You have a city engineer. Why do you need a consultant to handle that? Those are just questions. because that was brought up. And after that explanation from your interim city manager and the mayor talking about why a consultant is needed, and listen, I don't blame the interim city manager for saying that. He's kind of in a tough position right now, right? And from all of my dealings with the interim city manager, who at the time was the assistant city manager, he had always shot me straight, always gave me good advice, and like all the other council members said, he's a good person. So I don't want to talk about this and leave it with the impression that I'm saying anything negative against the interim city manager. Your city managers, your city attorneys, all these folks who are hired by council are going to paint a bright light for the city, and so they should. That's their job, right? Okay, so after all of this, council, it was council's turn. The citizens had their time for citizens' comments, and now it was council's time. Let's listen to some clips from that.
Parting ways with Rob Schomer. I'm hearing terms like separation agreement or what have you. No, we discussed, as in any corporation with a CEO, we discussed parting ways with Rob Schomer. What was the best thing for this city to do? The best use of your tax dollar.
Is the city of Huber Heights a private corporation or a public government? Some may want to pretend it's a private corporation and that they can just do whatever they want. However, there are those that believe it's a public government, a representative government, and you represent the people of the city. So acting like it's a private corporation, is that the proper analogy? You be the judge. Now that we're on the subject of government and structure, I want you guys to think about the meeting for a minute. Do you remember them talking about council's only responsible for hiring the city manager, the clerk of council, and the city attorney? Those folks are the subordinate of council. So if the mayor wanted to, say, ask the city manager a question about a certain topic, as the subordinate, he would have to answer that question. Well, guess what council is to you? And guess why council added a non-disparaging clause? Because now they have plausible deniability when you ask them why the mayor initiated and forced a resignation, essentially, right? He admitted to that. Don't you find this interesting? Okay.
Monday night we were told, yes, that
he was resigning.
He was going to resign.
Well, why would we even have discussions of with or without cause or anything else? Why would that even be part of it if he was resigning? He had submitted, or he was submitting a letter of resignation. He was leaving the city. Why would we even discuss letting him go with cause, without cause, or anything else of the sort? What would the point be to that? Because he's already quitting.
I'm sorry. Because he was going to be leaving the city if he could get a consulting agreement.
Mr. Otto?
I know, Mr. Lyons, this is going to be hard for a lot of you to swallow, but thank you, Mr. Lyons. I think you touched on something that was very very important, but I don't think it was really heard or understood very well. If we go back to what Joe had read earlier concerning the mayor's motion, or the motion that was made, that was stated by the mayor, it did say for a total of $150,000 for that agreement. Section 2 does mention the $150,000 paid, and then it continues to say that it will continue in full force and coverage all health, dental, and vision insurance at city expenses through March 31st, 2022. So are those expenses free, or will that $150,000 be less our calculated amounts of that cost?
As we discussed in executive session, and I don't dispute that you may not have understood, but I thought I was very clear that we were accepting a resignation. It was going to cost $150,000 plus a year of insurance.
But in the motion, it was for a total of $150,000 for that agreement.
I understand that.
So
I did the will of council.
Correct.
I did the will of council, and the agreement was signed pursuant to what I was told from council. And the mayor's motion, which for $150,000, did not specifically include that other amount. No, it did not.
Okay. The amount is obviously going to be much higher than $150,000.
$150,000 plus $5,000 for insurance.
Thank you.
All right. So the city attorney said, I thought I made it very clear. I can understand how people can get confused. We're going to jump ahead a little bit. We're going to come back to this, but we need to jump ahead and listen to this.
Mr. Lyons?
Thank you. Jerry, how much is the total consulting agreement now with the new addition that you added to us, please?
It's still $150,000 for the cash payment, and then the insurance cost instead of $5,000 is going to be approximately $20,000.
Oh, so it couldn't have been that clear. You folks understand where maybe some confusion had filtered into all this conversation? Maybe there was confusion in the back room on March 8th. Maybe. I don't know. I'm clear. No, it's not actually. No, it's not clear. Actually, there's an additional $15,000. Oh, my bad. You can't make it up, guys. You really can't. Okay. And when Mr. Lyons asked that question, that was from the March 16th meeting. So we went forward a day. Now we're going to go back to March 15th and just keep laying all this stuff out for you guys to analyze for yourselves.
But yeah, that sounds like what happened.
I appreciate that, and I do recall that basketball game in our discussion. After the March 8th City Council work session, or City Council regular meeting, I was informed, Mayor, that you had called the law director sometime Sunday morning, late Sunday afternoon, and stated the previous city manager was going to resign. Do you know what time that call occurred? No, okay. So between Saturday, March 6th at about 1:20 p.m. until the phone call to the law director on Sunday, I guess one of the many questions I have outstanding is, who spoke to the previous city manager and forced his resignation? Was it Mr. McDonald? Was it Mr. Campbell? Or was it yourself? Because it was not me, and it was not Mr. Otto. And it wasn't Mrs. Baker. So one of three people, and it wasn't done. So one of three people had that information between Saturday afternoon and sometime Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. Somebody reached out to the previous city manager and forced his resignation. That is the question I think people in this community need to know.
May I tell you what I think happened? Alrighty then. Roger Podacter went out after work. He had a few drinks and he came home. But he wasn't alone. Someone else was with him in this apartment. There was a struggle and he was thrown over that balcony. Roger Podacter didn't commit suicide. He was murdered.
Well, that's a very entertaining story, but unfortunately, real detectives have to worry about that little thing called evidence.
Uh-oh. I think I heard a toilet flush. Maybe somebody lost a turtle. Well, I guess I'm a little out of my league here. Einhorn, good work. Oh, there is just one more thing, Lieutenant. This This woman is Roger Podacter's neighbor. She lives across the hall. She said she heard a scream. Is that right, ma'am?
Right.
And you said you had to open the balcony door when you keyed into the room?
That's true.
You're certain you had to open this door?
Yeah, I'm certain.
What's the point, Ventura?
Only this. This is double pane soundproof glass. There's no way that neighbor could have heard Podacter scream on the way down with that door shut. The scream she heard came from inside this apartment before he was thrown over the balcony, and the murderer closed the door before he left. Yes! Yes! Oh, yeah! Can you feel that, buddy? Huh? 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 I have exorcised the demons. This house is clear.
Should we hear more from Councilman Shaw? All righty then.
Mr. Gore stated, and I quote, "I would ask Mr. McDonald if you would get with Mr. Schomer as quickly as possible to get those agreements. His resignation is effective on the execution of that agreement." His resignation is effective on the execution of that agreement. There will be a special city council meeting called within the next 48 hours, within 24 hours of the execution of that agreement, to name the interim city manager who would move forward from there. The only difference with what Mr. Gore said after the vote and what his motion was that was carried by this council is at the end, after council had voted, is council did not vote that his resignation is effective on the execution of that agreement. The motion stated that the law director would execute the resignation and consultation of the city manager, Rob Schomer. So a lot of folks have been getting caught up on this word execute. As the mayor had stated, the cheap politics, the spin games, have been getting caught up on this legal term of execute. Well, the city's used execute before. I'm going to be doing a wonderful video to show you, the residents, how you can go in and look at our city's website and meetings and see how many times the word execute has been used. Oh my goodness. But here's the key. Was the term execute used correctly across the board, or is it being cherry-picked by certain individuals? Allow me to answer that for you. So, as we had stated through the motion, and the execute term was brought up, let's take a fast forward back to our previous administration, back on May 8th of 2017. A resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into agreement for the establishment of the opt-out electric aggregation program consultant. At that time, the word execute was used by the city manager. The reason I know that is because I went back and watched that video, and as a matter of fact, the previous city manager ran that council meeting. For some reason, Mr. Rogers wasn't here. Prior to that, at the work session, it was discussed again. So it was asked that the city manager who was running the meeting execute those agreements and bring it back to council, because Mr. Otto questioned him on that. So, what had happened? August 14th, 2017, it was brought back again, except in a different topic, as the Harshmanville Road project. Then we discussed it again on November 27th of 2017 for Suez to execute that agreement. What's the difference? The agreements were brought back at a work session publicly so you all could see it, discussed by this council, then moved to a council meeting where we all could debate it and vote on it then. That's the term execute. Again, I've got examples. We can, continue going on with that. So the question outstanding, in my opinion, is when the law director, and Jerry, nothing on you, because this council asked you to execute. I'm sorry, the mayor's motion asked you to execute. So I guess the question is, were we using the word execute correctly before or now Because where the confusion comes to play, as a lot of people have stated that I'm confused, oh no, I'm not confused. When I left here Monday, I was very, very clear that we were firing the city manager at that time. We were window dressing it, as had stated by some, to the residents to allow him to resign so other opportunities down the pike, if he wanted to get a different job, whatever the case may be, could be done. And we're going to pay $150,000 for a consulting agreement that we weren't provided. Mr. McDonald did go through some of the topics in there. And again, shame on me if I didn't ask questions a little further on that. I will admit that. Shame on me for not asking further questions.
Yes. Shame on you, Councilman Shaw, for not having documents in front of you on the vote. We've established that. But it was a good discussion piece that he brought up about the word execute. This council has to make sure what they're voting on is exactly what they're voting on. They represent you. They must make sure that they're representing you in the proper manner. So I'm going to move on to something that has always been near and dear to my heart, and that is these backdoor meetings that seem to happen, that have happened for years in the city of Huber Heights. That stuff has got to stop, and the residents need to make sure that that kind of thing stops. This is in Washington. You guys live in a city of 40,000 people. It's okay to discuss ideas openly. Secret meetings do not need to happen, but we need to review what was discussed during the meeting about the ever-elusive Saturday meeting.
Mayor, if I may, I direct my comments to an individual council member, if I may.
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell, I'm closing with you tonight, sir. Did this council provide you any direction or authorization to have communication with the previous city manager regarding his employment?
No.
Did you do that on your own free will?
I met with Rob Schomer. I had scheduled plans for my wife and I to meet with him. His father has recently passed away, and we wanted to give him a sympathy card, which we did.
I hate to hear the circumstances surrounding that. However, when we left our meeting on Saturday, and please correct me if I'm wrong in my recollection of that, me and you, had asked the mayor to get with the law director to pull those contracts and to make sure he had copies for us at Monday's meeting, correct?
Yes.
I guess I'm confused on why, after that conversation, we would tip off the previous city manager of our conversation.
It wasn't a tip-off. During the meeting, the city manager had mentioned to Lori and I his state. He had recently lost his father-in-law, now lost his father, and we went into the discussion, and I explained to him that I thought it was my opinion that the city in the near future would be looking to go in another direction.
Let's stop it right here. We should all pray for the former city manager's family. Definitely. But how does it transition from that discussion where one of your family members passes away and then, hey, by the way, you're fired? How does that happen? I don't know. That's always, when I watch that, it just stuck with me. And it's a question I would have, like, how? To me, that seems horrible, but I don't know. That's just me. All right, moving on.
Now, you and I had texted and then talked on the phone earlier that day. I think around 12 o'clock. I think 12:06 actually.
Was it Saturday or Sunday?
Sunday.
We did talk on Sunday. I was putting a timing belt in. Yeah.
But you were also telling me that you had slept on our discussion, and that you were comfortable with $125,000 severance.
Severance pay. Firing him severance pay, yes.
And I knew that I did not convey that to Mr. Schomer. I actually haven't said that to anyone outside of this conversation. But I would ask, why didn't you bring that up here tonight?
My conversation on the severance?
With me. Because we talked about side conversations and conversations that we weren't having with all of council. Well, that's one. And I've waited all night for you to convey that to all of our colleagues.
And again, because it was my understanding that when the consultation agreement that was brought included the severance piece in it.
And that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm talking about tonight before I had to bring it up. Why didn't you bring up the $125,000 discussion you had with me?
I hear you. Yep, Mark, make sure you're
Why did you not tell everyone during your dialogue that you had discussed with me and that you'd be okay with $125,000 severance?
Because again, when the topic of conversation for tonight regarding the consultation agreement included that severance piece, and I think that's what we're dancing around.
But we're not dancing around anything. We talked about my talking to Rob.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about things that all of council didn't know, but you failed to bring that up until I did. And I thought that was an important piece of all this since Monday.
Okay, at this point, the mayor wants to discuss the term execute. And he says this.
There have been times, just so everyone is clear, there have been times where this council passes legislation authorizing the city manager or the law director or somebody to go out and do things, execute contracts and agreements that never have to come back to this council to be voted on, to be talked about, to agree to waive a competitive bidding requirement. That's happened in the past. One specific time that's happened was with Resolution 2019 R6794. This council approved the purchase of 51 and a half acres on Executive Boulevard for $3.75 million. But in that agreement, that was voted and approved 8-0. Council approved a resolution for $4 million. That's $250,000. That's $250,000 that these same people are talking about, not the process, voted to allow Mr. Schomer to go out and negotiate consulting agreements, surveys, whatever, all the necessary appurtenances that Mr. Rogers always adds into our legislation. And former Mayor McMasters, thank you, sir, was so kind enough to point that out. He said publicly that Mr. Otto's statement was outrageous that we never do these things. We've done it this time for $250,000. They approved Mr. Schomer to go out and do whatever he needed to do without ever bringing any of that back to council to pass that legislation after the fact. And we also gave him the opportunity and approved him to waive any competitive bidding requirement in that legislation.
Okay, so I think there's a very important distinction to make to that, to everything that Mayor Gore said, versus actually removing the person or seeking a resignation from a person you don't feel is doing a good job anymore, and then you window dress it as a resignation. Now, all of council, and I think most residents would agree, and those listening to this podcast would agree, you want those contracts in front of you when it's time to vote for it. You don't want to let anyone do anything like, oh, you can just write whatever. Especially Team Huber. You guys know what happens in the city of Huber Heights. You guys know more than anyone, right? That's what you ran on, is we're going to do better. And I can't stress that enough. And I like Team Huber. I think everybody understands that. But you can't let people just take contracts. Anyway, there's a big distinction, okay, between allowing the city manager that you trust, that you've hired to do this job, go out and execute certain things, and then there's a difference between forcing a resignation and executing that. That is a major difference the residents need to understand. Okay? So that argument falls short with this podcaster. This is something else that Mayor Gore has said that I want to play for you guys because obviously the whole story's over on www.hhoh.org. This podcast is my opinion. This is what I think of it. This is what I think are important points to make so the residents of Huber Heights can finally wake up to the silly political games that are played in Huber Heights. I think you're waking up to it. But I want you to hear this as well.
I hear a lot about how so many people on this council don't know what's going on or haven't heard anything. And I just want to bring up a couple instances where, I feel like people making this claim are a little hypocritical. There were some discussions that happened between Mr. Otto and Mr. Shaw and the Dayton Chamber of Commerce regarding a company called Cargill. I'm sure you guys know about that, or you know what Cargill is. And there was some discussions going on about how we were going to try to get them to separate providing all their water from the city of Dayton and have Huber Heights provide that water. I didn't know about that. Now, it happened a while ago. Mr. Webb, did you know about that? So I'm really getting a little frustrated at being accused of all these things that we're doing nefariously or that we're not letting people know by two people who continue to do those same things. I had a conversation with, well, I don't know, but I didn't know about that. You never told me.
Oh, so Mr. Falkowski knew about it. He was at that meeting.
Okay, well, but Mr. Falkowski's not on city council, and he wasn't on city council.
And I think you were invited.
And that's what we're talking about. Okay, so I also
it was discussed in a public meeting.
It doesn't matter. You talk about council not knowing things. That was never addressed on council at a public meeting here, where you informed all of us what your conversations regarding Cargill and what that was about. I had no idea.
Okay, it's important to point out. Apparently, there have been a few meetings that have happened that residents didn't know about, and obviously the mayor didn't know about, but other folks were involved. The assistant city manager at the time was involved, apparently, and it was brought out on the public dais. I've seen a lot of things in my day. I've paid attention to Huber Heights City Council quite a bit. And there isn't often many times that Councilman Shaw does not come back to council and tell people exactly what he's done. It's important to him to let folks know exactly who he's talking to, whether it be the NLC or Dayton Chamber of Commerce or whomever. Carrying on.
I'm just making that claim that sometimes
it's a false claim.
The things that you say and what you accuse us of, you are being very hypocritical because we don't know those. Another point of contention, I found out, it was actually during the swearing-in ceremony of Mr. Otto and Mr. Shaw this last time. Mayor McDonald from Trotwood approached me in the back room and she said, "Hey, Mayor, I'm really excited and anxious to get to talking to you about how you guys may be able to provide water to us in Trotwood." I didn't know about that.
That's been spoken of publicly
No.
on this diet.
You guys have talked about selling water to other places, but I had no idea you had those level of discussions with another mayor of another city about providing water. Now, so again, you can laugh it off. See, but if words matter and you're accusing this part of the dais or this side or me of keeping things from you. Now, quite frankly, I've never really made a big deal about that because, quite honestly, I think all of us on this council have skill sets
and are good at different things. I've never had an issue or a problem with anybody going out and talking to a developer. If you know somebody that can come to Huber Heights and help us grow, I have no issue with that, and I've never said anything. What I have a problem with is being accused of something that you do. I just think that's very hypocritical. So from that perspective, I just want to make that clear too. That's just, I'm sure there are several others, but those are two instances that I know that discussions were had that I was never made aware of, that I didn't know. And, shame on me for not being popular enough to be invited to a meeting about Cargill with the Dayton Chamber. But I mean, I do have a day job, and I wasn't.
All right. So that's a little tit for tat here or there. You guys are used to it. You're used to all that Team Huber, Team Heights, back and forth. And I'm going to talk at the end about how you can stop that as the resident if you want to, if you choose to. So we may hear a little more to that, but I want the listeners of this podcast to hear this.
I think what I'll finish here, it's very interesting that it's come to light that, Mr. Shaw, did you and Mr. Otto discuss your number of $125,000?
No, because at the time that Mr. Campbell asked me to get back with him, that was a conversation. I believe I even told Mr. Campbell, hey, you asked me to reach back out to you. I have not spoken to this Mr. Otto. This is my first call to you. So, no.
So did you discuss the things we talked about that Saturday in that meeting with Mr. Otto?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So you had reached out then to Mr. Campbell. I just want to make sure I'm clear here. You'd reached out to Mr. Campbell, said, hey, give me a call. He called you. You said, yeah, I've slept on this, and I'm okay paying the city manager $125,000 severance.
That's actually incorrect. I told him that was my gag. However, I didn't have all the information because I was still waiting for Jerry to make his presentation on Monday.
Okay.
So that was a baseline discussion. And yes, I did advise Mr. Otto what happened because he was invited, and you had stated, hey, please.
I even said, sure, yeah. I invited him to the meeting, so absolutely. I was totally okay with that. I just wanted to ask if you had shared with him your gag number of $125,000. So I think then, if we're talking and being honest and open, I think everybody needs to know that I think, in my own opinion, as I'm listening to all this, it seems like everybody was okay with paying Rob to go away. Whether it was $125,000 or whether it was $150,000 or it was $152,000, I think everybody was okay with paying Rob to go away. So I don't understand now why all of a sudden the money is being made the issue. Because the money, to me, doesn't sound like the issue. What the issue seems to be is that you didn't get to fire Rob Schomer.
So right after that, Councilman Shaw talks about something about a political spin game. I'm here to tell you, there's not 1 second of this that I do not believe that Councilman Otto and Councilman Shaw were very happy to get rid of the city manager, regardless if he resigned or they fired him, whatever. They've been working toward that for a long time. And finally, who caught up? Who caught up? Who got to speed on this one and then had to initiate it all? They've been talking about this for years. And finally, Mayor Gore comes around. Now he's angry about it, of course, but how long does it take to catch up? To understand that, hey, this person's not right for that job. I think at the end of the day, they're going to be vindicated, Team Huber. Through all the mistakes, they're going to be vindicated. You guys were right. That's essentially what you're saying when you are the one who admits to initiating the resignation. You guys have been right all these years. And it's taken me a while to see it. But you saw it. Good job. You finally saw it. All right, so we're going to finish March 15th, 2021, the special council meeting to discuss all this. It was a long meeting. It was like 3.5 hours. We're going to finish it with a piece of a resident comment.
It needs to stop. As a resident, I'm just telling you as my personal thing, I'm tired. I'm tired of every time hearing this back and forth. It gets on Facebook, it gets on everything. It's been going on for years. Just right now, it's time. It's not just a matter of getting on Facebook or not. I'm just talking about it needs to stop. We've heard this all tonight. I mean, we're going now on, 3 hours of pettiness now.
All right. So the meeting ended, and they decided to come back on the 16th and vote on all this stuff again to clean the books, make it all, have everything aligned. You wouldn't need to do that if there weren't mistakes made, if there wasn't confusion. But it happened. And thankfully, the meeting on the 16th was short. And we'll go over that real quick.
And Mr. Rogers, would you read the resolution, please, or ordinance, please?
Item 3A, an ordinance amending ordinance number 2020-0-2453 by making supplemental appropriations for expenses of the City of Huber Heights, Ohio, for the period beginning January 1st, 2021, and ending December 31st, 2021 at the second reading.
The ordinance was read. They have some discussion.
Thank you, Jerry. I appreciate that. This whole process, the mayor wanted to force the resignation. Then the mayor conned some council members with different wording in the motion. And now that brings us to this particular appropriation. I'm not going to vote for this appropriation tonight because I don't feel we should be paying the contracted amount for severance package if we had the opportunity to terminate with cause. And that would have saved us, the city, easily $75,000, $80,000 of the taxpayers' dollars. Now, if I were to make a prediction, I would predict a big bag of money showing up on somebody's back porch behind some bushes for their campaign this year. And I bet that there are council members who would be unaware of that happening. Don't expect that to show up on the campaign finance report either as a public record.
Nope.
And that's the kind of action that lands people in prison.
So now here on the podcast, we have come full circle. They voted for the motion, and it carried 5-3. So, is all this put to bed? Is another Huber Heights fiasco done? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think there's going to be more to come from this. There's too much inside of all of this for it not to come out. But we shall see. Earlier in the podcast, when we went back in time, and this is my final thoughts. If you ever watch the Jerry Springer show, he has final thoughts. This is Matt Truman's final thoughts. So when we went back in time and we listened to the mayor talk about from the I think it was the January 2nd, 2018, when he gave his speech about the city manager contract, and he said it was irresponsible to have to negotiate a contract during an election season. I guess you should ask him, is it irresponsible to fire the city manager during an election season? Listen, for me, both of those is no, it's not. It's good. A lot of people say, hey, why isn't tax season during an election season? Different people would be in office, wouldn't they not? Come on, holler at your boy. All right, so we're going to end this, and I'll end it like this. For years, I have been trying to stir up residents to really pay attention to their government. That's why I did this podcast. That's why I started Brick City Town Hall. That's why I ran for office, sat on commissions, volunteered, did everything I did because I want people to be involved in their own community. Well, it just so happens I think the Huber Heights government is a mess. I think you agree. And I know how to fix it. But the residents have to get involved or it won't be fixed because your council will not do it. 3 initiatives that I came up with, and I'm going to add an extra one tonight. I did a video about a year ago. It's over on the Doc Truman YouTube page. I posted it on Brick City Town Hall, I think, in some comments or something. But 3 initiatives. Number 1, term limits. Term limits would pass in the city of Huber Heights with flying colors. And in order to get term limits on the ballot, you got to have 5 residents joining together to create a PAC. Then you get signatures. You go to the Board of Elections. There's a whole ordeal that takes place. Call the Montgomery County Board of Elections if you want to put an initiative on the ballot. Term limits. 3 consecutive 4-year terms. The 4th year, you have to take a break. You can't run for office. That'll clear some of this mess out. Some of the logjam of politicians always being on there and creating this feeling of Washington inside the city of Huber Heights. So term limits. Secondly, an all-at-large council, meaning every citizen in Huber Heights gets to vote for the entire council. Well, Matt, what if people on the same street are elected to city council and then one street, say Roseberry, is run in Huber Heights? No. You'll still have your wards. You'll have Ward 1, Ward 2, Ward 3, all the way to 6. But the entire city gets to vote for the entire city council. So if you want to run for place 1 or Ward 1, you have to live in Ward 1, but the entire city gets to vote for you because the entire council votes for things that happen in Ward 1, 2, and so on. Third, an elected city attorney. Believe it or not, there's several attorneys that live in the city of Huber Heights, a city of 40,000 people. You don't think there are attorneys that would say, hey, I'll work for the city. Why not? I'll run for the city and be the city attorney. It happens in cities all around Ohio. An elected city attorney would be beholden to the voters. They would have to do things legally, but for the voters and not for council. And my 4th new idea is a no fraternization clause for you, the resident, meaning without some sort of an announcement, council can't fraternize outside of City Hall. They have to make some sort of an announcement like they do all these meetings. Yeah, that would bust up some of the friendships and this and that and whatever. But how else are you going to keep these backroom deals from happening? These backroom meetings from happening? I don't know, folks. Those are just some ideas. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Took me a while to get it done. I spent a few hours on it, compiling all the information. I think it's important. I love my hometown. The residents of Huber Heights, you did an amazing job, but you need to get some initiatives on the ballot. You got to fix your city council, or they're going to continue to tell you, we love you, we're going to do the right thing, and then they're going to be on the 6 o'clock news. Okay? Because we've heard it before, right? And it keeps happening. Got to question that. All right. Talk to you later.